do is to see whether or not there is a connection.
Right.
Because there are many, many interesting parallels that take place.
Well, and right now, mainstream medicine is denying it even exists.
Sure, they call the people delusional. In fact, this is one of the traits. There's three main things that are similar in this. The first is that the issue of Morgellons, as well as that of the aerosols, there has been a very systematic, large-scale attempt to marginalize the issue and control the flow of information on it. The second is there has been a deliberate and systematic attempt to ridicule those people that present the evidence on it. And the third would be that there are some rather striking physical similarities in this material, especially at the microscopic range. If you recall, I'm telling you that these filaments that are airborne have been identified at the submicron level. There's no natural filament at that level. I've looked at every filament I can think of. You look at hair, I've looked at spiderwebs. Look at them all. They'll usually be about roughly 7 microns and above is where they start. The asbestos is the one that would be closest down to 2 microns. So they ridicule the people and they ridicule the issue. And in addition, if you look at this Morgellons disease, I wrote a paper on this. In fact, you put one photograph up tonight on your site from the paper I called Morgellons First Observations. If you look at that, that is a single fiber. But if you look within the fiber, you will see a subseries of numerous fibers. And if you measure those fibers, you will see that these fibers are down again at the submicron level. So there is a rather amazing similarity between the physical morphology and constitution of these, and also the fact that the filaments, the airborne filaments, have been identified to be carrying biological components. And we mentioned the 7 things. You noticed I mentioned biological.
Yep.
All right. This comes from the fact that repeatedly environmental samples have detected the presence of unusual biological components over and over and over. And one should certainly, by any right of mind, one should consider whether or not there is a likely connection between unusual, unexplained submicron fibers that manifest in a disease form in the human body and the forced and continual breathing of air, which has been modified, and within it repeatedly detected the presence of filaments of similar form in nature. I don't think that's uncalled for to say, do your job again, tell us what we're dealing with.
So after you send the certified letter with samples to the EPA, what do you get? Anything?
What they did was they returned correspondence with a choice phrase, basically. This went on for a year and a half. Correspondence went on for a year and a half, with probably 3 or 4 letters, and every time the EPA would come back with a phrase saying, we are not aware. This was their phrase. Just as you have Mr. Gallus, who doesn't seem to remember very much, the EPA is unaware of any aerosol operations. This is what they'll say. They use the word unaware over and over and over. They did not acknowledge the receipt of that material, even though we know it was received. They simply ignored it. They made no reference. After 1.5 years, a Freedom of Information Act was filed by a third party, I believe apparently just trying to track down whether or not what I said had happened actually occurred. I think it was more of an investigative thing where they're saying, hey, EPA, did you really receive this material? It was at that time that the EPA returned the sample after this FOIA was filed. They returned the sample to us, and they made a statement that it is not the policy. Again, they used very interesting language, but they said it is not the policy of the EPA to test or identify any unsolicited material.
Jeez.
And that statement just blows my mind because if you look at that language, number one, they're resting their argument on policy. Policy is nothing based on law. Policy is a decision of whoever happens to be running the show at the moment.
If they asked you for it, they'd test it. But since they didn't, they're not going to look at it.
And that's the other part, that they have to ask me for it. Besides being their decision, what they want to do, they also have to ask me for it. Go look at their mission statement and tell me if that's what the mission statement says.
No.
The mission statement of the EPA is to protect the welfare of our environment. It is a tax-funded government service for the public. That job is not being done.
Bees are disappearing, Clifford, all around this planet. Might chemtrails or, here we go, aerosol sprays have anything to do with it?
What are disappearing? I'm sorry.
Honeybees.
Oh, well, that's another interesting question. Okay, again, I try to be as accurate as I can, and that is, with the information that is available thus far, no direct linkage can be drawn between the disappearance of the bee population and the modification of our atmosphere. Okay, so that's the factual statement that we can make at this point. Now for the sensible interpretation. The planet has been modified in significant ways. It is not just the air that we are speaking of. These materials, these salts, affect the water supply, affect the soil, which in turn affects the food supply, and it affects life in general. Life and the planet is being affected. Now, if the planet was suffering damage, is it not expected that the life forms on that planet are also going to now be suffering? And is it going to manifest in a bee population? I don't know the specifics yet. We don't know that. And this is another thing. You know, this is a mystery story. You have three main mystery stories I'll introduce you tonight. One will be the mystery bees. The second will be the mystery malnourishment of the whale population.
Mm-hmm.
And the third will be the mystery aerosols. We haven't got to that tonight, but NASA has released a very interesting article, which they actually entitled The Twilight Zone. This is what they entitled it, talking about our very subject tonight, and I'll bring that up later if we get a chance. But here's the thing I cannot understand at all. These do not need to be mysteries. You cannot tell me that this world, this is not even a matter of this country, but that this world does not have the resources to dig into this issue of a bee population or a damaged whale population and identify the source of that when we can map every gene on any life form we want. It is ludicrous to me to think that these things are to remain as mysteries, which is how they are always presented in the media. We have no information.
You know, of these seven that you mentioned, it's also possible, Clifford, that all of them could be out there.
All of them what?
They're all being used.
Oh, in fact, that's my point in terms of coming up with this list. The point is that all of these are consistent with the data. In fact, that's how the list was developed. There was nothing that was included in the list that I have offered unless I look over all the evidence I have over years and I say, is this consistent, is this consistent, and is this consistent? And so the sensible interpretation here is that any or all or some are quite likely, if not possible, or let's say possible if not likely, are occurring.
Yeah. Well, next hour, we'll get into all these seven. Also, you've got Alan Hutner with you. I'd like to put him on for a little bit, too, next hour if we can, Cliff.
Yeah, unfortunately, George, he's now retired for the night.
Okay, so we'll let him go. But we'll get into these seven because we're going to take a lot of time to get into this, Clifford. Then in the last hour, of course, we'll open up the phone lines. Can people email you stories or their thoughts through your website?
Sure, certainly. CEC102@USA.com is the email address. I'm terrible at email, I'll confess, in terms of replying. I read everything, but I'm pretty rotten in terms of replying to everything. I just don't have the time for email. But I read everything and anything anybody sends to me. So they're welcome to send information to that address if they wish to.
Are other people jumping on board to research this? You know, we know a few. We've had them on the program. You were on many years ago, first time with me, and I'm glad you're here with me tonight. Other people beginning to jump on this bandwagon? Well, in terms of the people that are aware, again, we don't have information because there is a deliberate attempt to constrain and manage information on this. But I don't think it's a stretch at all to say that certainly on a global scale, we are dealing with scores of millions of people that are aware of this issue at a very fundamental and real level. They know that this is happening. Now, in terms of who does what, you know, that may be a different story, but I'm certainly not the only researcher. In fact, you know, there's some that work on Morgellons. I'd refer people to Dr. Staninger, Hilda Staninger, and her work on this Morgellons because she has been able to take that further than I have by far, and I'm very grateful for her work. Mike Castle has worked with her. There's a league of people that have devoted much of their lives. You know, it's not my choice to devote 7 to 8 years of my life to a crime. My desire was to call attention to it and have it investigated as it should be. All right, stay with us, Cliff. We'll be right back with you. We're really going to digest these 7 possibilities when we come back on Coast to Coast AM. And our special guest tonight, Clifford Carnicom. We're talking about aerosols, sprays up in the air. Back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM.